Hello, I'm Oren Tirosh and welcome to the Sports Science program where you hear how sports professionals work together to optimize athletes and team performance. My guest today is a distinguished exercise physiologist and sports scientist and researcher, Dr. Simon Sostaric. Simon is the founder and director of Melbourne Sport and Allied Health Clinic, a private practice specializing in patient healthcare, sport performance, biomedical research, and industry healthcare. He has practiced for more than 20 years, including multi-period time in USA, Europe, and Japan. Dr. Sostaric has accomplished an international track record in many sports, including running, triathletes, cycling, football, adventure sport, extreme sports, and motor racing. He worked with the Geelong Cats Football Club, Formula One driver Mark Webber, Bradley Smith Tech 3 MotoGP, and Richard Usher, international adventure racer and Ironman triathlete. Today we will hear from Simon's experience and challenges that he faces daily during his work with world best athletes. Simon, welcome to the program. Can you please describe your work with the Geelong Cats Football Club?
Okay, I've worked with Geelong in a number of roles over the years, probably over a 12-year period. The first time I was there to help their full-time sports science staff, which at that point in time weren't many, there were probably only one or two, to help them develop their sports science program in-house. And then a couple of years later, I was asked to come and provide expertise through an independent review of their training services and their sports science service, and it happened to be a particularly challenging time for the club, and they needed someone from the outside to come in who was not biased, towards the coaching staff or anyone else in the football department. So I spent a period of time helping the club make the next important steps for them to overcome some of the limitations that they had through their maybe lack of expertise or structure and infrastructure as well in moving forward. Then a couple of years later, I had a 3 or 4 year period with them where I was involved in helping them develop their research and development program. Again, as an independent advisor, they have their full-time staff in place, and I needed to be there because the people in-house, not that they're not experts in their own right, but to develop their research expertise, they needed someone else to come in, which is what I did. And in that 3-year period there, I was involved particularly in development of a thermoregulation program, or helping them develop their strategies around training in the heat, or using heat acclimation programs to help them in their performance, not just in hot weather, but also in cool weather. Through that process, we also had a number of research projects to validate the early stages, and then a stronger, more controlled study towards the end of that program, and that involved some students who could do postgraduate research, and I also had a sort of conjoint role in co-supervising the student.
Does your work involve the collaboration with sports scientists from other disciplines?
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of never a focus on it just being physiological. There's generally going to be crossover somewhere. I typically will work with biomechanists, sports psychologists, sometimes skill acquisition, but there's going to be a series of integration with other practitioners. If it's a team sport, there's generally going to be more of that integrated approach. And then from an individual perspective, it'll depend on where the athlete is in their program, or what their objective is in taking a step forward with who they may start with. So, that integrated approach is certainly an important part of how we work on a professional level. And we also work with other physiologists who might have expertise in a slightly different area.
Is there a standard approach to teamwork? And if so, how is this decided?
Yeah, there is. There's no sort of textbook approach to it. If you've got, say, 50% of the time I would have someone coming to me in private practice because they have a problem. And with that problem, once we go through their level of risk, we can then decide what's the most appropriate way forward for them. So whilst they may, say, have initially requested help from an exercise physiologist such as myself, I could go through the scenario, see what the athlete is about and where they're at, where they need to go, and decide that I might not be the right person for them to see initially. They may need to see a biomechanist to get started because we need some further information from a gait analysis, for example, or investigating why the mechanism behind an injury that we can't cover often in our own expertise.
There must be times when you doubt the judgment of team members. How do you deal with that?
It's a very good point, and it does happen on occasion, and maybe not necessarily doubting the judgment, but certainly having a difference of opinion. So we could be in a situation where we've got like practitioners, so we could have exercise physiologist here, an exercise physiologist here. There could be an athlete, particularly in an international sport, like who are involved in Olympic Games or World Championships, and you could have an athlete who has a primary practitioner, and they may be engaging the services of myself, as in day-to-day management of their training loads and their competition loads. And we have certain interventions that we will use along the way to help them with their recovery, to help them with their performance. Once an athlete then goes onto a national team, they're more in the hands of the staff that are working with that national team on a full-time basis. So you could have another physiologist here, and once they're in that particular period of preparation, they're in their hands, and that exercise physiologist might have a difference of opinion or might have an objective that's a little bit different to mine, and doesn't necessarily mean that's a wrong way to go, just different. And whilst I might not agree with it, we certainly put things on the table, and it's about communicating in a sort of conversational manner. If it's something that's really contentious, well, that's where we'd say, let's put things on the table and look at where's the evidence in the pathway that you're wanting to take this athlete. And we look at the peer-reviewed literature if we need to, or the efficacy or the safety, reliability, any of these performance parameters. That's not usually the case. It's usually just that little bit of a difference of opinion, and we all don't have to agree on the same things. But if there's good justification about why, a physiologist on a national team might want to take an athlete to altitude, for example, then they'd need to be more positives than negatives in that particular pathway. So similar thing can apply to other practitioners as well. So we might have, a psychologist who believes there's a certain way that we need to go about preparing an athlete, and as a physiologist dealing in more of that integrated perspective, might say, well, this is what we need to do in order to get these adaptations and to get these responses in preparation for competition or a specific event like an Olympic Games. And without doing this, the athlete's going to be at a disadvantage. So there is a little bit of, I won't call it banter, but a bit of toing and froing, communication, coming in hopefully on the same page. And ultimately that's what happens. I haven't been in a situation, in the last 10 or 15 years at least, where we've sort of been at a stalemate and haven't been able to have a resolution and a way forward where the athlete's interests are at heart. Usually that difference of opinion will be discussed, and we can come to an agreement on what's going to be right for the athlete at that point in time.
What aspect of your work gives you the most satisfaction?
Oh, look, there's a lot of things, day to day, to see that you've made a difference, with an athlete or an individual who's not an athlete but really needs your help, and to see them make some, gains forward in what we might have projected as being the ideal outcome. That's obviously very rewarding. But I think in general, the challenging cases, or when someone's got a problem, a major problem, and it's affecting their performance as an athlete, it's affecting their lifestyle as well. So, in order to overcome that problem, we need to have a solution. So the bigger the challenge is, I gather or guess I really like that aspect of the job, that that really looking investigation, where we need to do some research, some validation, perhaps like complex cases. I thrive under those conditions.
Did your university degree prepare you for your profession?
At an undergraduate level, the university degree was certainly a good start. It's everything has to have a starting point, and I think that's what it was. My outlook on things in life now, through my profession, has certainly changed a lot, since my undergraduate days. And I thought I knew a few things when I was an undergraduate, but I realise now that I didn't. I didn't know much at all, and you can't expect to know everything when you're going through that initial stage of being an undergraduate. But it's life, not just in your profession, is all about learning, and you never stop learning. And if you think that you've learnt it all through your undergraduate degree, then you're going to be in for a rude shock in life. But I certainly think that you start to get a sense of what it's about at that level, but it only gets better, and you really learn a hell of a lot more when you're on the job and with that experience, with having years in your industry of choice.
Where do you see the exercise physiology profession heading in the future?
I think moving forward in Australia, if we want to focus on that naturally, in sport, there's always scope for growth in the area, and as we start to learn more about the human body, and as technology improves, then I think it opens up the floodgates to what we're able to do. Nanotechnology is coming in now in a much bigger way, using physiological devices, monitoring athletes remotely, which we can do via cloud-based platforms, therefore integrating with people with good skills in IT and engineering. That's sort of, I think, becoming a much bigger part of the profession. There's certainly going to be a ceiling on sort of on the ground positions in sport in Australia, because it's a small country in the scheme of things. So I think that at the moment, I wouldn't say the industry is saturated with physiologists, but certainly the scope of operations in football clubs and Olympic sports and other sporting organisations has certainly gone to a level that I didn't think was possible when I was an undergraduate. But I think if you're open-minded and you've got that ability to draw in other skills, particularly in IT, and that ability to integrate with other practitioners, you're certainly going to be held in high esteem. And secondly, I think that private practice has still got an enormous way to go in terms of the growth, because it's a relatively new profession in the scheme of the allied health professions, say, compared to physiotherapy and some of the other, probably more recognised allied health professions. It's really, it's been around for 15, 20 years or so, and as we start to understand more and more about how exercise, physical activity, those lifestyle factors, how that affects the general population and chronic disease, when we know now that being physically active is right on the top of the list as being amongst the most important factors for the general population. So I think private practice still has a lot of scope to improve, and particularly as the population is ageing, people are living longer, and they're going to be affected by musculoskeletal injuries and so on.
What advice can you give Swinburne students that would like to work in sports science?
I think the best approach is to be open-minded and to spread your skills across, or spread your interests across all of the disciplines within the sports sciences. So you gain an understanding of the fundamentals of how they all work and how they integrate together and what role they play in sport. I think, as an undergraduate, it's a starting point, and I think that's the best approach to take. Don't feel like you have to be pigeonholed into one area because you're at such an early phase of your career. Give yourself the opportunity to go through the course, take opportunities to work or to volunteer with with organisations that embrace sports scientists, and in Australia that happens to be the football codes, the popular sports. Don't be afraid to put your hand up for volunteer work. Persistence also pays off, so bug people, ring them, send them emails, keep on their case and get involved, because that enthusiasm goes a long way with those organisations that will ultimately employ you. And secondly, I think that have an open mind about exploring opportunities overseas as well. And Australians have a very good reputation overseas, not just in their expertise and the thoroughness in their area of education, but also in their attitude and their work ethic. So Australians are very often embraced in all countries of the world. And in doing that, you've got opportunity to probably open up some more doorways, and maybe you stay overseas if the opportunity is right. But certainly you can have that opportunity to step back and look back at things and see what you need to do in order to go forward and perhaps specialise in a specific area.
Dr. Simon Sostaric, it has been such a pleasure speaking to you. I learned so much. Thank you for joining me to the Sports Science program.
Thank you for having me.